Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. Welcome back to the show. As always, I pride myself on bringing in someone to talk to you about what's happening right here in North Carolina. We do talk a lot about politics, but I also try to work in a lot of conversations about business, which is also my passion as well. But I'm very grateful today to have David Larson. David Larson is the opinion editor at the Carolina Journal. He's also a former editor with the North State Journal, and he's done some work in the North Carolina legislature, and he's new to the Locked In show. So, David, thank you for locking in, man. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Algenon. Look forward to talking with you a bit.
Yeah, and for my audience that don't realize, all those great thoughtful articles that you see me write in the Carolina Journal. I have to say my partner in crime is David. He normally takes whatever it is that I'm trying to get out, and he'll edit it and point me in the right direction, give me some good direction and guidance, and that's how we produce some of these pieces that I know so many of you have come to enjoy. And David, I appreciate you being a great partner with me over at Carolina Journal.
Absolutely. Yeah, my pleasure is, you've had some great ones and you have some good ones in the queue that we're gonna have coming up too that your audience can look forward to seeing. So
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Obviously, I think anybody enjoys being able to get their thoughts out about a lot of things. And I guess let's start there because you work in an interesting space at Carolina Journal. I mean, you are the opinion editor, so you get a lot of opinions, mine included. You get a lot of people sending a lot of different things in. How do you decide what you really want to focus on? How do you decide what you want the Carolina Journal audience to really learn more about?
I mean that's a great question. And I think there's a lot to balance there. I mean, I can't just say this is something that I like and this is something that I don't like, and so just go from that. But it's really a lot of it is kind of what is our target, what's our coverage area. So obviously, I look for things that directly interact with North Carolina politics, culture, economics. As you're in business, that's another thing we talk about. So things that cover that sort of content area that we try to cover. And then we also, being the John Locke Foundation, being a free market think tank, limited government think tank, if there's things that are submitted that wouldn't necessarily line up with our most newspapers have sort of an editorial view a little bit. So for our opinion pages, we do have that kind of limited government angle that we're looking to cover a bit there, and then just also quality of writing. Sometimes maybe we'd line up. It's an interesting topic for covers North Carolina, and we also lines up with our institutional priorities and things like that. But then, if it's just not quality writing, sometimes you get something like that. But a lot of time, I mean, you can usually work with people on giving some feedback and uh, working it towards a place where we can publish it. And sometimes you'd be surprised. I'll get a high schooler even. Sometimes you have people who have been in career for many decades, and then you're like, it's they might be really successful in their field, but maybe writing's not their strength. But then sometimes you get a high there's one in particular I'm thinking about. I publish his stuff because he writes for Law Review. He's just one of
Hmm.
these really go-getter kind of. So you'd be surprised. I try to give everybody a fair shake and just read what they're presenting and see if it would line up with kind of what we're going for.
Sounds like a job with a lot of pressure. You've got so many people pulling at you and trying to share so many opinions that they obviously think are very important, and also must believe that other people in North Carolina should be aware of. And so you stand at the gate at the Carolina Journal to make sure that those right things make it to the paper, and obviously work with others as well. I've been reading some of the pieces that you've actually written, because you also write for the paper as well. I've been reading some of the pieces you've been writing recently. I thought I maybe would bring up a few of those and see if we
Sure.
could do a little deeper dive on them. What one of them, and you actually text me about this one, but this was a piece that you wrote about the Daily Haymaker, and it almost came across, and I read it a couple of times. If I'm picking up on the tone of the article correctly, the Daily Haymaker maybe have come after the Carolina Journal a couple times, and obviously from the tone of the piece, it sounded like maybe you got frustrated with that, and Thought maybe you would go after them a little bit. But for my audience that may not know much about the Daily Haymaker, talk a little bit about that piece.
Oh yeah. Um, let's see. What do I want to say about that? Yeah, I mean they're kind of a like a blog type article site. So I mean it's definitely not it's not the News and Observer or something like that. I mean, but they back when I worked at the legislature, a lot of people would read them, and it's an interesting take on things, definitely from a more like conservative or populist kind of angle. And I think more lately they've gotten their clicks just from attacking people on the conservative side that don't
Mm.
line up exactly and with you know and there's definitely a place for that. I think that's um it's good to have people keeping all sides honest and doing all that. But I guess where I wrote from is I did think some of what they're saying, especially about us, and was was well researched or I just also it's just kind of, to be honest, sometimes I just do something like that for it's fun, why let some of the people get to talk trash, I guess, a little bit, if you're more in the grassroots, or you're in kind of, you have your blog, there's, why let them have all the fun. So I think that one was a little more lighthearted. Maybe it didn't seem lighthearted, but to me, I was having fun with it, just kind of like in the same spirit that they poked at us, just poking back. So I'm sure, I've never met Brent Clifton. I'm sure he's a fine guy and probably would mostly agree on things. But sometimes somebody pokes you a couple times, you poke it back. So that's kind of with writing, that's and on social media and all that, you get a lot of that. But they're yeah, they're critical of us a bit. I'm sure, he also said that we do or have done a lot of good work in the limited government sphere. So I'm sure he doesn't always disagree with John Locke and as well. But yeah, it's just sort of a back and forth, kind of a sparring on um,
Almost like a 1990s rap battle. Is
exactly, yeah.
a little bit of
That's
back
all
and
it
forth
was. It
there.
was just a
But
rap
you
battle,
you
but
you you said something I want to drill down on. You said that maybe some of the articles that they've published haven't been well researched, and one of the things that I watch very closely is in this new digital age that we're in. Everybody, any and everybody who wants to be a journalist, I guess, is one now. I mean, you've got blogs, you've got social media posts, you have podcasts, you have so many different ways that if people want to get a message out to the general public, they can. And to the general public, a lot of times, sometimes it is challenging to discern between what might be opinion, what may be fact, what was research, what wasn't. You're in this space. I mean, you day in and day out, you spend your days on this type of content. I mean, what would be your advice to my audience? I mean, how do you really decipher now between what's real, what's opinion, and what might be a lot of hyperbole too?
yeah, I think we're in an era where you don't really trust certain side. Like if you're, let's say, on the right side of the aisle, you might not trust News and Observer, and if you're on that left side of the aisle, you probably don't trust the Carolina Journal, and even within those factions, like people who like the Daily Haymaker aren't necessarily the same people who like the Carolina Journal. Maybe a lot of them are, but I think trying to get to primary sources and maybe reading a couple opinions on something before making up your mind. But if somebody says, just to take that Daily Haymaker one for example, where he says like Dallas Woodhouse is the brains behind the John Locke Foundation, before just saying, okay, well they said that and I trust these people. Dallas Woodhouse doesn't even, you know, have a position. I guess he does write op-eds for maybe a couple a month for the opinion section. So in that way he does, but he did used to work here, and so maybe that's why he thought that. But it's good to kind of drill down to like to the real source where you can find the information and primary sources. Maybe talk to some people who are involved in that specific sphere of things. Um, so that's what I'd say is like, don't just trust your silo, because we are pretty broken up. There was a time, where there's sort of a general the news media, you have your nightly news or whatever, and everybody pretty much assumed Tom Brokaw or whoever was had everybody's best interest to just have a straight down the line, but opinion on things, or a presentation of things. But I think it's not that way right now. Most people have their trusted sources, and then all the other sources are, not trustworthy to them, and probably for good reason. A lot of people are presenting news that uh, falls into kind of their worldview that backs up their prior uh,
Yeah,
assumptions and things of that nature.
they create a little bit of an echo chamber out there, depending on who you might follow or what social media groups you belong to, or even now it even comes down to what social media platform you may be on as well. Do you think that the general person or the general American or even maybe the general reader have they just lost curiosity, David? I mean, it was a point in time when I think things like curiosity and critical thinking were obviously promoted and championed. Do you think we've lost a little bit of that? I mean, people just sort of follow, whatever their friends are telling them or whatever they see at the top of their timeline happens to be what they follow these days. Or
I think so. Yeah, I think we have. There's a level to which the news became, rather than informing yourself, became entertainment, and then now it's as a form of entertainment, it competes with, if that's all it is to most people, a lot of people, then they're it's going to be competing with just aimless scrolling. It's going to be competing on social media. It's going to be competing with video games. It's going to be competing. A lot of people uh, spend their time. I saw something about free time, that we actually have more and more and more free time, but almost all of it has been spent on social media,
mm,
and they call it screen time, I think is what they called it. But yeah, watching TV, streaming things, social media, video games. So we have a lot of time, and then that kind of infotainment, or that I think the news becomes that, and then you might be getting a very shallow understanding of a lot of things as you scroll, but you're not
mm.
really. You're talking about curiosity. They might not be picking one of those things to, okay, I've seen a lot of headlines and read a lot of opinions and comments about Israel and Palestine. What if I were to actually learn a lot about it, and read about, the Balfour Declaration, or how the 1948 partition of it, and just really like, how did all that come to be, and um, then
And
maybe
really just get that
yeah, rather than
context
the
on it.
shallow, just dive down a little bit into those things that you've been reading about shallowly. You can really actually have an educated opinion on them.
No, I totally agree. And I have a piece in the Carolina Journal about the rise of populism and sort of how that has detracted a lot of people from traditional conservative values. And for my audience, if you haven't went to the Carolina Journal and read that piece, certainly I encourage you to go find them on Facebook or X, or just go to the website Carolina Journal. And I do think that when people lose that curiosity or they lose that critical thinking, that is where you can see just this surge of populism on either side of the aisle. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the right side; it can be on the left side. But it becomes a lot easier for people to take advantage of how your emotions around a particular subject and an issue versus you utilizing your critical thinking ability to learn more about the context related to that issue. If you're just now
Absolutely.
joining the conversation, I'm Algenon Cash. You're locked in. The other voice that you hear with me today is David Larson, who is an opinion editor for the Carolina Journal, former editor for North State Journal, and also a former staffer in the North Carolina legislature. And, David, another piece I noticed that you wrote about earlier in the year, you talked about public safety and how North Carolina voters are wanting more public safety. You even referenced Sergeant Dale Nix, who was the Greensboro police officer who lost his life trying to stop a few young folks that were basically stealing from a gas station. I think he was off duty at the time, but ended up actually getting murdered in the process. I know in that particular article you highlighted some of the crime stats that are happening in Raleigh and Charlotte, but even here in my backyard, right here in the Triad, we've just seen a huge jump in the number of violent crimes right here in Winston Salem. Um, does this seem to be some kind of a becoming a leading issue for voters across North Carolina? What are you hearing?
It was in the polling I cited in that. I don't have it in front of me, but I remember that it was it was considered to be a top public safety as a general theme, seemed to be a top priority for North Carolina voters. And I guess it differentiated by race in that Black voters had seen that violent crime was a priority of getting that under control where they lived, and a lot of white residents thought that fentanyl and the drug epidemic, they said that and homelessness, I think, was another one that they had cited for public safety. But just as a general category, public safety was a big topic, and I think I think there's a sense, whether it's true or not, it's hard to tell. Just a general sense of more chaos and less, trust in society and less order. I will say, back there were times in American history that were much more violent. So there is tough to say that. I mean, like the 1990s, I think we're getting back up to there's a gang era where the homicide rates were very high in the 90s. I think we're getting back close to it now, though.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a little different though in that a lot of the shootings now are often like in Durham, where I kind of live in that area, Hillsborough. The police chief there said a lot of it was younger people, not necessarily even associated with official gangs, but those kind of like friend cliques almost that have beefs with each other. And a lot of times they find the shooters are 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. So it's something that they're saying it's sort of new in that way, that it's not kind of gangsters in their 20s or something like that. And then on the overdose, I think fentanyl and all of that. I do think that's unprecedented, really, because in the 90s, I think up until then, about 5,000 people a year would die from drug overdoses. And then by late 90s, early thousands, the heroin epidemic, it was like 10,000 people were like, this is a big deal. It just went up to 10,000 a year. We're up
Hmm.
to over 100,000 a year now. So
Wow.
that heroin epidemic from the late 90s and early 2000s, now 25 years later, it's with fentanyl, it's just more deadly. So I think the public perception on that is very justified, I think, to be alarmed by that, because it's nothing we've seen in any other prior, like the crack epidemic. There's been methamphetamine epidemics and the heroin. None of them have hit these kind of numbers that are just all different backgrounds are seeing. So yeah, I think it's alarming to people, but we'll see. I think somewhat the border is wrapped up in that too. You see that as a top priority, and I think that's part of why is they get the sense of a chaotic border leading to these drugs being here. Sometimes with supply and demand, part of it is just people are wanting, for whatever reason right now, um, Americans are demanding, the product of opioids, and sometimes if there's a strong demand, people find a way to provide it. So I don't know
Hmm.
that if you crack down really, really hard on the border, that the opioid crisis is just going to melt away. I kind of have my doubts, but I do think a lot of them definitely definitely connect the two strongly.
Yeah, I try to follow public safety myself, and I know at least at a national level, we had been, over time, we've been trending in the right direction in terms of there have been reduction of violent
Yeah.
crimes, and generally, I mean, obviously, I don't think you ever get to a point where you fully 100% solve the crime issue, but it looked like we were at least moving in the right direction, especially within a lot of our larger cities here in the country. But if I'm hearing you correctly, based on the piece that you wrote earlier this year, you're saying that we're no longer going in the right direction. Is that correct? Or we're starting to see crime at a national level tick in the upwards direction?
Yeah, since the 90s, we've been going down on violent crime. We were in a really good direction, but then around the COVID epidemic, it really took this upswing back up, and I think that's why everybody's really alarmed. Is I don't know that it's up to the 90s level yet, but it was definitely, and some of this like,
Swinging
oh,
back in that direction.
definitely, and you'd get these stats like that Charlotte or Greensboro hit their homicide record. That's also because these cities are growing, so the percentage wise, an increase in crime plus a much higher population, you're going to break your homicide record frequently. So, but yeah, I do think overall over time it came down, and then hopefully it can this uptick won't be a long term trend. I kind of don't think it will be, just because more part of I think why it was going down is people are a little more isolated now and spend a lot more time online, is so I think is more of a blip, maybe just because of COVID and some the issues with policing that I think police backed off in some areas where there was high crime, trying to figure out new policies based on you know during the Black Lives Matter movement and all that. I think they felt like they're under pressure to maybe figure out new strategies, and some of them backed off a bit from the violent crime areas, which didn't necessarily help crime in those areas. So yeah, I agree. I don't think it'll be um, a long term rise. I think it'll probably start coming back down, but you know, you don't never know.
I actually wrote a piece for Carolina Journal last year talking about the rise in gang violence, and I definitely agree with you. I mean, even here in the Triad, we've seen an exponential increase in the amount of gang violence, the number of young people that are some kind of way getting their hands on illegal guns, and obviously committing violent crimes with guns. And I agree with you. I do think it seems to stem from this. When I was young, and I'm dating myself a little bit here. When I was young, we all went outside and played together, and we all knew each other, and we were all engaged in different activities, whether that might be sports or hanging out at the recreation center, and doing these things where you actually knew the people that were in your community. And I do think that nowadays we have a lot of keyboard warriors and a lot of people that are constantly stuck behind screens and playing different video games that make give them some kind of an idea of what culture is about, that it's not. Also think that even some of the entertainment and the music and a lot of things that these young folks are getting in terms of inputs seems to be leading in this direction of where in their minds picking up a gun and actually taking the life of another person is just not it's just not they don't think about it as much as other times. I was actually watching something out in Oregon, actually, where they had really went the direction of trying to decriminalize a lot of drugs. Um, However, they're starting to see that that necessarily hasn't worked. I mean, what's your opinion on that? I mean, you're somebody that watches the fentanyl crisis. You write about it. I mean, is the solution to decriminalize drugs, or is the solution to just get a lot tougher on them?
I would say it's a combination of so there's a group, the harm reduction movement, and they've been really big on kind of destigmatizing and giving safe syringes so people don't get hepatitis from injecting. And so they've been going on the maybe the softer path of the way you help people who are addicted to opioids might be to be sympathetic to them, and if you make their lives better, like they have housing first is another thing they do, where you give people housing and then they won't, their lives will get better and they won't want to do drugs, things like that. I think that has been shown. They won't agree because they have their own research, but I think that's been shown in these big cities out west to not have worked very well. So San
Mm,
Francisco, Seattle, as you're saying, Portland and Oregon, they've tried a lot of these harm reduction strategies, and it seems to just attract to their city center a lot of people who are injecting drugs, and then they can go get their safe syringes, and they don't even call them needle exchanges anymore, just because they a lot of times just put them on the ground. So
mm.
you'll see the needles strewn around, and so I think that way is not the way forward in my mind. I think I do agree that like being sympathetic to somebody who's addicted to fentanyl and it is important. So the way I would think, I'm not speaking for John Locke Foundation or anything, but um, is be pretty harsh on no tolerance for somebody's in the middle of the city center in Chapel Hill or Asheville, which this is something that's happened. Both of those places have had issues with not enforcing, people just using drugs in the city centers, and it's affected their business and all of that. I think you arrest those people um, and get them off of the street. You have the same group of 10 guys just doing that all day and kind of creating a bad scene. But I kind of I do agree a little bit that you want to see it as sort of as a health issue with those people. Being addicted to a drug isn't necessarily um, voluntary after a certain point. It's like your free will is pretty compromised from a drug by definition if you're addicted. So I think almost instead of jail, like a mandatory treatment, something of that sort. I'm in favor of that just because our jails are already so overcrowded and
Mm.
so such a not a good place for mental health where a lot of times they're in solitary confinement. You take somebody addicted to fentanyl and you just drop them off in a cell for a couple years, they're not getting better in there. It's a pretty sad situation, and we don't have the staff at a lot of these prisons. So there are places like Trosa, which is in Durham, and I think they're opening up an office in Winston-Salem actually too. But
Mm.
it's sort of a inpatient. You live for a year or two in this community. You don't go anywhere. They have offsite job things, training, and help them get their GED and things like that. So I do think you take them off the street and you force them to do something, but maybe something that helps them better than just tossing them in jail because that's somebody's son or daughter. That's somebody who, maybe they got addicted years ago and just haven't been able to kick it. So if we can help people get off of it, I think that's the best path forward. It's just a really difficult thing for a lot of people to kick, and they have to get to a point where they want to. And so sometimes you have to kind of force them to get there because leaving them on the street and giving them all the things that they need is, in my opinion, that's just enabling them to continue. And it's not a good thing for society to have
No,
a bunch of people addicted to opioids, especially if they're hanging out in the middle of the city center, driving away business and doing petty crimes and things of that nature.
no, I totally agree. I mean, it's a really complex issue. I mean, anytime you have a conversation about how do you manage the drug crisis, which really starts to feel like a never-ending crisis. I mean, I know at least 60 years ago we called it the drug crisis, and that crisis continues to persist. I definitely agree with you that I don't think throwing them, locking them up in jail is the best way to deal with what I think is a mental health issue, which I think addiction really is. I mean, obviously, that addiction can lead to you committing crimes and even committing violent crimes for you to fulfill that addiction. And then, obviously, on the other side of that, it's the people who are obviously selling these illegal drugs, which is a true crime. So it's very complex all the way around in terms of how you address it and how you deal with it. Again, if you're just locking in with me, you are late. You're running late, but you still got some good conversation here. I'm Algenon Cash. You are locked in. The other voice that you hear with me today is David Larson, who is an opinion editor with the Carolina Journal. He's a former editor with the North State Journal and also a former staffer with the North Carolina legislature. David, as I get ready to move into the final moments here and get ready to wrap up, we are in the middle of a big election year. Every 4 years, we always say this is a big election year. This is the election of your lifetime, those types of things. But I want to come back to an article or a piece that you wrote recently where you talked about the fact that we don't really have debates any longer. And I know when we had the Senate election year with Ted Budd, I mean, we basically Senator Budd didn't show up for any debates with his opponents. It seems like that even in this year, I agree with your piece that it's very unlikely that we'll see some type of a debate between Biden and Trump. I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's much incentive from either side to do so. Have we got into a really dangerous space here where we're not really calling candidates to the mat and asking them to just express their policy ideas, like what are you actually going to do for the state, or what are you going to do for the country, or what are you going to do for your city or county, that where you're asking for their vote?
Yeah, I do think we're there. I think part of it is, if you're really far ahead at this point, in some of these elections, the voters no longer uh, hold you accountable or kind of demand that you join the debate. So that wasn't always the case. Like with Ronald Reagan, he was really far ahead in his primary with George H.W. Bush. Both of them ended up being president at some point, but at that point, Reagan was way ahead in the polls, and his campaign manager advised him, "Don't be in this Iowa debate." because we don't want you to just be another person in the pack. It kind of makes you look like you're on the same level with them. So he skipped out on the debate, and it actually went from being 30 points ahead of everybody else
Mm,
to the voters punished him, and he went down. And George H.W. Bush actually won Iowa. I mean, Reagan went on to win that primary. H.W. became his vice president, later also became president. But I think at that time it was seen, if you, that's kind of insulting to us if you just skip over this debate because you're not being willing to come forward and make your, as you said, like make your voice heard, and what are you standing for? What do you want us to, why do you want us to vote for you? So I think now that bluff has been called, maybe, or the dam has been broke, however you want to think of it. Whereas a few candidates have now, President Trump has done a similar thing with his primary, and I think there's if other people are doing it, I don't think you're going to be held to account to the
mm.
same way. So I think Mark Robinson, he was doing that when Bo Hines ran in the 13th district. He showed up, and I think maybe he was giving advice. I don't know, but he was probably going to win anyways because Trump had endorsed him and it's going to do a big rally. So he ended up winning that, but he didn't go to the debate. But as you said, Ted Budd as well. So I think that's a big part of it. And then the other part of it, when I talked to Jim Blaine downstairs, he's also in this building. He's a consultant here in Raleigh who used to work for Senator Berger. But he was saying part of it is that the people who host debates no longer can provide a platform that is beneficial, that adds more benefit than risk.
Mm.
So when we did all trust the Tom Brokaw and whatever CBS and NBC and those ones, then everybody could just go there and you get a neutral platform that reaches all these different types of people that you want to speak to. But if we're all in our little silos, there's maybe not uh, one media platform that can provide you the audience that you want. And so some people just don't see the point in it. They see there's more risk because what if I have a bad moment? What if I have a gaffe? If barely anybody's going to see this, and then on the downside, somebody takes a clip and puts it on social media, and then so it's more downside than upside. So I think that's the other part of it. Um, but yeah, maybe we'll figure that problem out, and the voters will start demanding it. Election or that debates happen again. But for now, that's kind of the state of things.
Before I let you go, earlier we talked a little about just curiosity and people having that intellectual curiosity that we talked about. How much of that again is playing into the lack of debates, though? I mean, it almost feels like we're in this space where people would much rather get up, scroll on their phones, and be reminded why they support somebody. Again, the echo chamber, than they would be willing to confront some issue about their candidate that maybe requires them to actually be intellectually curious.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, that's what the debates were about. Is you get these five people up there, and you really consider which one of these is making the best point, which one of these would be the best candidate. I'm really going to weigh all of this, and I thought I liked this guy best, but maybe now this woman over here. So as you're saying, like maybe that's not how people are looking at it now. If they've already picked their person, and then they want to just maybe find some clips online or some memes or whatever that just kind of, so it's not as much about weighing who's going to be our best leader, but I don't know. Maybe there's other reasons for it, but I do think curiosity. You do need, for democracy to work. I think you need a public that's curious and that really wants to choose the best leader for all the people. So we'll see if that lack of curiosity might be a problem going forward. But
You're scaring me, David. It's almost like you're talking about the end of the union here.
that's all I'm saying. I'm just saying it's all over. So no,
I just had a chance to watch Napoleon. To my audience, that's available now, especially if you have Apple TV. But that's a really interesting story how he actually came into power. And a lot of it was a lack of intellectual curiosity amongst the people. So, David, real quick as I get ready to sign off here, for my audience that may not follow Carolina Journal, they may not be a subscriber, where can they learn more?
If you go to carolinajournal.com, we cover North Carolina politics, elections, culture, the legislature, all kinds of good things on there if you're interested in North Carolina. And we have a print edition. And so our print edition, at the moment, we're doing six a year. And so, it's not a weekly or monthly, but I think a lot of publications are moving more towards online. But we wanted to maintain that as kind of something in print, some tangible thing that people can have a newspaper. So that's something you can sign up to get as well. We do have a daily newsletter, that our email newsletter that you can sign on to. That's good. Get a little taste of the day's news in your email box every morning. And we also have a TV show called The Debrief, which Algenon, you have been a great panelist on a number of times. So that's most of what we have going.
Yeah, and I encourage my audience to go check out all that. At the very least, you should be following Carolina Journal on X and Facebook. That's really where you'll get a nice stream of not only the opinion articles, but quite frankly, they do a lot of news articles. They do things that are news breaking. You heard us talk a little bit about Dallas Woodhouse. He's somebody that I strongly encourage you to follow on X. If you're looking for that real political insight behind the scenes of what's going on with North Carolina politics, I think Dallas does a great job of breaking news quite often right on his X page. So, David, I appreciate you locking in with me. I appreciate the partnership that I have with Carolina Journal. And to my audience, of course, if you want to read some of my thoughts and insights on some of today's most important issues, you can catch that a lot of times in Carolina Journal as well. And also to my audience, I just want to say I appreciate you. Thank you for locking in with me. Also, make sure you stay locked in with WTOB, because every Sunday morning, that is where the Locked In Show broadcasts. But if you happen to miss me there, hopefully you're subscribed to my podcast. You can always download that on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, you can lock in there. And until next time, y'all stay locked in.
All right. Thank you.